Chapter 12. Lane Elk kept us on the move. Warriors rode at the head of our band and in the rear. The women, children, and old men rode in the middle with our extra horses. We were on our ponies before daybreak and traveled until the sun was halfway up the sky. Then we stopped to cook a meal. The ponies grazed while we rested. Then we got back into the saddle and traveled again until long after dark. Each sun, we journeyed far. More of our wounded died. Gray Eagle, the father of Whitefeather, died after 3 sons. One old woman who had been hit in the belly stayed behind to die alone. She said she could go no farther on a travois. I believe that she felt she slowed our march and endangered the tribe. We laid her in the shade of a willow and left food and a bottle of water beside her. We crossed the mountains and turned again toward the rising sun. When we rested, we talked. People talked against the whites and agreed that they were all enemies. Settlers from the Bitterroot Valley had fought beside the soldiers at Big Hole. The same people who had smiled at us and sold us sugar had killed our women and children as they slept. Anger ran deep through the camp. When our scouts stole horses from the ranches we passed, no Nimipu said a word against them. The horses we took could not be used by the soldiers who came after us. On one raid for horses, the warriors killed 3 men on a ranch. But our warriors obeyed Chief Joseph. They did not scalp the dead men. Instead, they covered the bodies with blankets. They took no money, only cloth to bandage our wounded. One morning, scouts warned that soldiers were nearby. The one-armed general and his men were at the place where we had camped last night, between 2 clear streams filled with trout. There was shade from cottonwoods and willows and deep grass for horses. The soldiers stopped there to rest. The chiefs called the warriors together. "If the general has no horses, the bluecoats cannot ride," said Lean Elk. "If he has no mules, the general will have no wagons. Without wagons, he cannot follow us. Tonight we steal his herds." That day we rested in the camas meadows. The camas blossoms had faded. The roots were still small, but we gathered enough to feed us for many suns. Some we ate raw, the rest we dried. We would mix them with huckleberries and shape them into cakes. The cakes were easy to carry on our horses. While we worked, the chiefs planned the raid. After the sun had dropped behind the mountains, the warriors went out in 3 bands, with Ollicott, Looking Glass, and Two Hole Zoot as leaders. Swan Necklace and Two Moons rode with Ollicott. When the raiding party left, I slipped out and climbed on my pony. I did not tell my father. I knew he would forbid me to go. Beneath a half moon, the warriors rode, swift and silent in the night. I rode behind them, careful to stay back so they would not hear me. As we neared the soldiers' camp, the horses slowed. I watched as the warriors rode among the tethered animals and cut their hobbles. They had worked for only a few minutes when a soldier called, "Who are you there?" A shot rang out. One of our warriors had fired his gun. It alarmed the soldiers. They began shouting. A bugle sounded. The warriors yelled and waved buffalo robes to make the herds run. Then they pulled back, firing over their shoulders as they rode away. Before they left, one of the warriors grabbed a blazing stick from a fire and set the wagons ablaze. General Howard was left with piles of ashes. Suddenly, there were wild screams, and a herd rushed past, plunging through the mist. Ollicott caught the animals with his fast riders and turned them back toward our camp. Stampeding animals were all around me. The Great Spirit Chief must have been watching, because the animals parted and made a river on each side of me. I could feel their hot breath, but as they pounded past, they did not even brush my legs. Swan Necklace rode by with several horses. He did not see me. After he had passed, he fired his rifle and snapped a whip over their backs. The horses screamed and ran in among the herd. A powerful hand grabbed my arm, the fingers pressing so hard against the bone that I winced. A cold knife blade touched my throat. A gruff voice said, "Who is there?" It was Two Hole Zoot. "It's sound of running feet," I whispered. My mouth was dry with fear. "Ah," he said in disgust. "You are going to get yourself killed." He dropped my arm and put the knife back in his belt. Two Hole Zoot snatched my pony's reins, then rode off after the stampeding herd, dragging me behind him. Before we had ridden far, the darkness faded. In the first gray light, we saw that we had captured only 3 horses, but we had taken all of the general's mules. We had no time to talk about the raid. The soldiers were close behind us. Half of the warriors slid off their horses and made ready to fight. The rest of us rode on with the mules. Two-Hole Zoot dropped the reins of my pony and slapped it on the rear. "Get back to camp," he shouted, and turned to join the warriors who crouched behind rocks. Not long after we had reached Camas Meadows, the rest of the warriors came riding in. We were in high spirits. Only one had been struck, and his wound was light. The bullet had skimmed his arm. It left a bloody path, but did not stop him from joining in the feast. His hurt was so small that the warriors gave him a new name, Little Wound. It was the happiest time for us. Our warriors sang, and old people crooned songs they had forgotten. We had taken a small revenge against the one-armed general. It gave him shame. A new spirit ran through the camp, some of the same spirit we had had before the white general came. We had beaten his soldiers in the battles for the Clearwater and Whitebird Canyon. "We beat them again," Ferocious Bear said. He sat on his spotted pony and shouted to everyone in the camp, to the lame and to the women who could only weave baskets and gather camas roots. At last, he went to our last redcoat and put a heavy hand on him. He said nothing, just gave Swan Necklace's arm a powerful squeeze.